What's going on, y'all? Welcome to 8 Cubes. I'm Cam Best, he's Lambie Series, and we're going to start out talking about Misery, the card that will release on Tuesday in Marvel Snap. Misery is a 4/7 that repeats the on-reveal abilities of all cards at the location it's played on your side and then destroys them. Now, the way I read this, and I suspect this to be true, is that it will only destroy the on-reveal cards. This is not a card that blows up your entire location. It blows up the on reveals after they have triggered. What I see this card being is a clog card, repeating White Widows, repeating Debris. That seems plausible to me, but at the same time, it's like a fairly relevant anti-clog card. It'll blow up a green goblin that your opponent puts on the board. What I can't figure out is what the hell else it does, because it has a relevant stat line and an interesting ability, but its ability cries out for a combo deck, and I don't think there's a combo deck that can effectively use it, and so I'm just sort of stuck on what this card is actually supposed to be or going to be.
Right, so this card, okay, I know it's called Misery, but I don't think it's that miserable of a card, to be honest, because I feel like, okay, so it's firstly it's a 4/7, right? And I feel like this kind of cards, like, you just need one good interaction, like one
Yes.
good interaction for it to like skyrocket, right? But like I agree with you that I can't actually think off the top of my head right now like what that one good interaction is. I was thinking like, okay, so I'm very curious though. Let's say you use this with Carnage, right? Like does Carnage pop this and then nothing else happens, or how does that work?
I think what would happen is Carnage would pop Misery, and then the rest of her effect would happen.
So it
Or
still
wait,
would
no, no,
happen.
no. Yeah, what would happen is Carnage would go off, eat Misery, and
Mm-hmm.
then yeah, that's actually a good question. But
Right.
hopefully we never have to find out the answer to that. The answer, as far as I can tell, is it's bad, don't do it. That's what I figured out as far as the Misery Carnage interaction. I would not want to be doing it.
Yeah, this card's very. I'm very curious about this card because I really want to believe that there is something to do with this card, but that's the problem. I can't figure it out as of this point in time.
I'll tell you two interactions that I like. Interaction number one, the hood. Love that. I
Of course.
love that. That is awesome, and I am super into it. Interaction number two, debris. Love that too. Those two interactions, if anything, are the two things that I'm most excited about with this card. And that's a bit worrying, isn't it? Because suddenly you have a clog card with a good body. Clog is already a strong deck that is giving it more stats when you draw the hood. It is a 4/7 that makes an extra 1/6 and gets rid of that -3 body on the board. And you can copy debris rocks. Imagine the curve of the hood into debris into misery. Outside of that, though, I don't know what it is. And I feel like that is kind of the only home I can envision for this card at all, which I think will come as unwelcome news to people who care about, the quality of games and having fun when they play Marvel Snap.
I mean, honestly, I cannot stop making this pun, but I guess it's good at making your opponent miserable, right? Like if you have that curve,
You're
I
making
just had to.
me miserable with that one. Next up, a topic I expect to cause some controversy with. It is time for the Scream Week in Review. As you know, these episodes come out on Mondays, which means many people are trying to figure out if they should invest in the Scream Cash or if they should save their hard earned Spotlight keys for a cash in the future. My opinion on Scream is that I hate every Scream deck, but they do have some real power. This is a card that released at the wrong time for it. This is a metagame
Mhm.
that is very, very tall. It's oriented on things like Hela or unfair strategies like Bounce or things of that nature that are unfair in a different way like Clog or Iron Man decks that are looking to go as tall as possible. 6 months ago, this card slaps. In the world where people are able to play a Magneto on turn 6 and be happy with that, this is one of the strongest cards in the game. And so I don't really know how to evaluate it in that context. The Scream decks all feel so fair unless you're drawing Scream on 2, and then there are still all these kind of unwinnable matchups that you run into because you're scaling your Scream, sure, but it doesn't really matter when your opponent is dropping like multiple Iron Men on the board. Your 10 points doesn't really have a lot of impact. So Ultimately, I feel like this card is a miss despite being a powerful tool.
Yeah, I think with respect to what the meta game is right now, I feel like Scream is just like it's just definitely gonna underperform, right? Because I feel this card, like you mentioned, like in the past, it's definitely gonna have like a huge amount of stats, because a lot of stuff is moving here and there and all that. But like for now, most of the power is centralized around like just building like one tall unit, right? One tall like card. And then I feel like with Scream, it's like way too much effort for like the reward of the card right now. Like I feel like the amount of effort, like we talked about it in the previous video as well. We said something along the lines of like you gotta play like some copium cards to make this like decent. And I feel like most of these copium cards don't actually fit in like many decks right now. Also just most of these cards are on reviews, and Cosmo is a thing right now.
Yeah, the other thing with Scream is there are two decks that have sort of sprouted up around Scream. The first is a Scream Clog deck, which I strongly suspect might just be better without the Scream package. And the second is the full investment Scream deck. And my worry about the full investment Scream deck is that it's the one that plays all the cope cards, and it only exists right now because the card is new and shiny, and that eventually people will get tired of it. There is this thing that has been happening a lot recently where cards will come out and there'll be like some pretty good decks you can play with them, but they'll be like tier 2 ish. And because they're tier 2 ish, they'll fall off where the true tier 1s stick around through multiple iterations of metagames, right? And to me, that's what Scream feels like. This is a card that is fine and good, and you can win with it, and you aren't stupid if you bought it, but there are likely, or there have been in the past, far more impactful releases than Scream. However, it is genuinely fun to play Scream Polaris type game plans. Like this is a good curve out mid range deck that has a lot of inbuilt scams in it, and it just isn't the right time for that kind of deck. That doesn't mean it won't always be the right time for it, but it has in the past been very hard for a deck that released in a bad metagame to really come back and change that perception.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons also like why the whole Scream thing is like severely overshadowed right now is because like the next topic, the next card is just the
Yeah.
one that's rocking the meta right now.
Yeah. Agent Venom is metagame baseline. I realize that some of this meta carried over from the previous meta. The original meta triangle on release day of Agent Venom was like Bounce and Hella and Clog, but we have gradually diverged from that meta triangle in like a very serious way because of the ways Agent Venom has influenced the meta. Agent Venom Bounce was the most played deck throughout the first few days of its release, and it led to a lot of real hard counter type decks being played in order to purely beat AV Bounce, which is always a bit of a tenuous situation for a deck to be in. In turn, this gave rise to decks that were able to compete with AV Bounce on points, but were not vulnerable to the same tech that the AV Bounce decks were. In turn, further, and we'll cover this later, Cosmo and Shadow King have become cards that to me define this metagame. A lot of people look at end games as things that define the metagame. I look at the major interactive pieces. Are we in a Shang-Chi meta? Are we in an Enchantress meta? Are we in a Cosmo meta? Are we in a Shadow King meta? Those are the things that to me define the outlines of what you can do. Are we in an Eliath meta? This right now, because of Agent Venom, is a Cosmo Shadow King meta. Agent Venom, when you play him on turn 2, is like a 216 or better almost all of the time. Extremely powerful card, but not imbalanced in terms of numbers. Like, this is not a card that is like, oh my god, it's so broken. It's just a card that, like, it's hard for me to look at it because, like, I feel like it is broken when I play it. But when you look at actual numbers, it's not that broken. It's just another good stats card. And I feel like this is one of the best season passes we've had in a very long time. I think this card has a ton of beef and meat on the bone.
Yeah, this card honestly to me is just like what Bast was to like pure bounce, right? Like I mean, there's a deck now that runs both Bast and the Agent
Yes.
Venom as well, which I think this deck might like legitimately be the best deck in the game right now, right? Like the one you
Yeah.
wanted to talk about, the Woody deck,
Yes.
with the Cosmo and the Mystique as well. Agent Venom is really just one of those cards that like we talked about it in the previous video as well, whereby you see it, you just play it, and then your game just becomes smoother. You know, like you don't really need to think whether you want to play this card now. You kind of like in the deck that it's built to like play this card, you kind of just slam it, and then it just makes the entire deck better. I feel like the fact that you mentioned Agent Venom is like easily a 216 is already enough to
Yeah,
convince like I guess myself and most people in general that like this card is just here to stay. I mean, who's gonna be sad about playing a 216,
right.
right?
This card is Prince Keliseth. That's my analogy,
Yeah,
right? Like
on
that's
crack,
what this
but
card
yeah.
is, right? Like your deck building is fairly limited with it. Like you can't do a bunch of stuff the way a Prince Keliseth deck could do because that was generic, but this card is Prince Keliseth for every deck built for it. It is just incredible on turn 2. You are often not playing it later, but when you get it on turn 2, it is so far and away the best thing your deck does. And that is a dynamic that actually is very interesting in Marvel Snap because, like, let's say you're playing a mirror, one of you AVs, the other one doesn't. It's like Zabu-esque, right? Like, if you AV and Snap and they don't have AV, I don't know what they're supposed to do about that. Like, that's just a very, 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 very steep hill to try to climb.
Yeah, you mentioned Zabu-esque. I think in more recent times, it's very borderline Wiccan-esque as well, right? Like if
Yeah.
your opponent gets the full Wiccan curve and you don't, you're just always 2 mana behind. In this case, if you get the Agent Venom on 2 and they don't, you're like 16 stats ahead of sorts, right? And any later they play the Agent Venom, it's like basically one less card that they could draw that's like buffed by the Agent Venom. So yeah, this is one of those cards that I feel like, I mean, you don't really get a choice whether you get to play it on turn 2 or not. But
Yeah.
like, if you do have it on turn 2 and your opponent doesn't, it's like literal snap condition right there as well.
Glenn Jones, the lead developer of Marvel Snap on the balance side, made a post on Discord in response to a community question that was very worrying to me, but at the same time did not raise as many alarm bells in me as it may have in some other people. Now, the specifics about this with what Glenn said was that he liked Hella's play pattern and did not expect to be changing the goal of the card anytime soon. Now, reading between the lines there are two ways to take this. One, there are no nerfs to Hela incoming. That's not what I believe,
Mhm.
but it is what I've seen some of my friends say. Two, they don't want to change the card Hela, but they would be happy with changing the context around it. And to that end, I have a couple of suggestions, but I think the best one by far would be let's say you're happy with Hela's play pattern, that's cool. Make Blade not targeted anymore. That would be a great way to be happy with Hela's play pattern, but still end up dragging that deck down a little bit. I don't think you need to be hateful of the way Hela plays out as a card in order to address the problems that her deck creates. And I think that that would be a very reasonable way to try to do so. In other words, I don't want people freaking out and seeing that saying, oh my god, they're never going to nerf Hela. That's not what I believe. I just think that whatever nerf they may do, it does not involve changing the card Hela in a meaningful way, limiting the amount of things it can summon, things like that. They like that she gives you a deck building goal that is different from the rest of Marvel Snap, but that's not the same thing as liking the exact 12 card deck that she is currently played in.
Yeah, my impression of what Glenn said as well should be very similar to what you think as well, which is like I don't think that they will change the Hela card herself in the
Yeah.
near future, right? Like it wouldn't be like she's gonna be like respawn everything with a -4 or something like that. Yeah, I don't think that's gonna be the case going forward. I do think the blade change makes a lot of sense though, because I feel like hitting Hellcow is a bit too much, and hitting blade making it a bit random again, I think is actually totally fine. And like I also understand one more thing that Glenn said, which is like he says he likes the play patterns of Hela, right? I think one of the reasons why that is so is because I feel like in this game, it doesn't always have to be the most big brain of deck that wins
Yes.
games, you know. Like I feel like there needs to be decks in this game that can win simply, like simple wins, you know. And I feel like Marvel Snap needs a few decks that like cater like not just to the casual player, but also to like the semi-competitive player that's like I sometimes just want like an easier deck to play, you know. And then Hela just fulfills all those goals, you know, like the newer players get a good deck that wins with a simple win condition, and the better players also can, I guess, abuse the simplicity of the snaps of Hela as well. So it's at the end of the day, I feel like having a simple deck that wins is important in Marvel Snap.
I agree with this almost entirely as someone who is a big fan of Murloc Paladin. I think my issues with Hela
Yes.
are very specifically about the way her deck functions in a metagame when she exists, she makes it harder for things to exist in the middle. Things can only exist at the extremes. And you see that, right? Like with Iron Man decks and bounce decks, everything pushing towards the extremes of the metagame in order to have the numbers to compete. And I think, it's actually the most interesting thing about Hela for me is how hard she is to nerf, right? Because you have Luke Cage to mitigate the downside of Hela, right? You have all of this targeted discard that is hard to actually deal with. And if you take power off of stuff, it doesn't actually matter all that much because they're still bringing back giant stuff. So, unlike most other decks, it's a lot harder to actually nerf this one. I'm interested to see if they do. And if they do, what the hell would it even look like? You got to get a little creative. And I'm not a creative guy. That's why I don't work for them. But I do think that like hitting the enablers, Lady Sif, Blade, probably not Hellcow, they just did that one. But that is the stuff that needs to be dealt with, not necessarily the card Hela.
Okay, you say you're not creative, right? But I remember very clearly that you got the claw buff like so
That's not being
correct. So
creative. I was just like, hey, that card needs more stats. That's not the same thing.
maybe you will get the blade change correct. Who
Yeah.
knows?
Oh yeah, for sure. That's if that happens, and like all seriousness, if that happens, they have to hire me. Like legally, that's how that works. So let's talk about that Iron Man deck. Yo Woody cooked it up. The Agent Venom Iron Man deck. I am sure anyone watching this is probably familiar. If you're not familiar, I did a video on it 2 days ago. It was the first deck on the tier list 1 day ago. So I guess if you're not familiar, I mean, why are you not watching my other videos? That's actually your fault, not mine. This is a very powerful deck that I have enjoyed playing more than anything else. And what I really like about it is how simple and straightforward the deck building is, because it's literally just the Darkhawk Thena Agent Venom deck, but without the bad cards, Darkhawk and Thena, because they don't match up to Hela points, they don't match up to bounce points, they're just not good enough. We keep Thena, I'm sorry. Without the bad cards, Darkhawk, Rock Slide, and Korg. And instead, we get things like Cosmo, the best interactive tool in the game. We get Iron Man, the best scaling tool in the game. We get Bast, an immensely powerful backup plan. And we get things like, Silver Sable instead of Korg, which is better after Agent Venom, better after Bast, just more points. And I think this is a good point to make the point about the metagame that I've been trying to make this entire time, and maybe for the last 3 weeks, honestly. It's just like, this is what Hela does to metagames. You need to have the ability to go tall. There's no room to exist if you're small. You have to be this tall to ride. And there are only a few decks that can be that tall. Hela is responsible for that. Bounce is responsible for that. The point ceiling in the game right now is very high. But what I like about this deck, more than any of those other decks, it actually cares about the board. It cares about interacting with its opponent. Maybe you're doing Iron Man Mystique. Maybe you're doing Cosmo Mystique. Maybe you're doing Claw Mystique. But either way, you're caring about developing a board. It's not just a turn 6 vomit strategy. Where you place your stuff has huge ramifications on your end game because of how Iron Man works. If you don't have enough stuff in a lane to go tall with an Iron Man, you're in trouble. What are you going to do about getting into those locations you can't get into? Okay, Claw. That matters a lot. Your positioning with Claw matters a lot too. What if you overinvest your Claw lane? You're not as good at winning the left lanes. What does that mean that you have to do? There's a bunch of actual things you have to think about in this deck that, with all due respect to Bounce and Hela, they don't really have to consider.
Okay, so for those that didn't watch your previous videos, I'm gonna do you
Yes.
guys a favor. I'm gonna list out the 12 cards right now because I think I want to talk about some specific cards as well in the list, but I'm gonna list out the 12 cards first.
All right.
So the 12 cards of this best deck is Bast, Kitty Pryde, Silver Sable, Thena, Kate Bishop, Agent Venom, Cassandra Nova, Mystique, Cosmos, Speed, Iron Man, and the Claw. Okay, so that's the 12 cards. But what I really want to talk about, right, and what I had a problem with for the longest time, which this deck solves, right, and because of Agent Venom as well, is that so what Agent Venom does is, as you guys know, everything becomes 4 power, right? Which means because Cosmo is one of the best floodgate counter cards in the game right now, you can do that whole Cosmo plus Mystique setup, double Cosmo essentially. But your Mystique Cosmo is not 3-0, it's 3-4. So it feels way less bad copying a Cosmo on a 3-0 than a 3-4. I think it's a super significant thing. And like KM said, right? Like the places you play your cards really matter with this deck. And I feel like this deck has quite a bit of player agency, but at the same time, it's not difficult to play. It's like good points, and you need to think a little bit, but it's not like so big brain that like no one can figure out how to play the deck. So the deck's really, really well built. So shout out to Woody for that.
Yeah, it's just been great ever since I first picked it up, which is like I got it from Woody when he had played 3 games with it, and he posted a picture, and I was like, "Oh, that looks really good. Is it good?" And he was like, "I have played literally 3 games, but I think so." And that's when I got the deck, and so I played it. I went like 14-2, and that's when I made the video. And now it has been played 750 times in Top Infinite. It has a 58.9% win rate in top 10% on Untapped, by far the most of any deck with those number of games. It has established itself as the deck to beat right now.
Yeah, so I just want to add one last thing, which is like Bast and Agent Venom. To me, I call these cards. To me, these cards are like enabler cards, right? Like it enables the full power of the entire deck. So being able to run both Bast and Agent Venom in the same deck is just basically like saying that anything you draw too early, you play Bast, you get buffs. Anything that you don't draw, you get to Agent Venom them, and they get like buffs as well. So like I feel like this deck has like two like early game enablers that like just snowball the entire deck's potential. Like, can you imagine? Like, I mean, in the past, 5-3 Iron Man was a thing. Now you can get 5-4 Iron Man, which is even more of a thing. And then your 3-4 Mystique could be an Iron Man as well. It's kind of insane.
I can imagine. Oh, I can imagine. But instead of imagining what I could do with that deck, I prefer to imagine how in the hell I'm supposed to beat it, because that's when I am happiest. I'd rather try to beat that than just play Endless Mirrors. And when I played against that deck, it definitely felt like Endless Mirrors were very Agent Venom centric. There wasn't a lot of agency that I had. One player had Agent Venom. It's like, okay, that's what's happening this game. So outside of that situation, I wanted to find a card that would be elite into it. And the answer is a package, right? Hazmat and Agent Venom are cards that this deck does not want to see. Agent Venom, especially, is playing for massive points here against either Iron Man or Claw. Just a very powerful card. Hazmat, of course, goes with Ajax. When I played the Hazmat Agent Venom that I used, it was just like a random deck that I liked the look of that had 25 games played on Untapped. I played it with Quicksilver and 5 2-drops. And I had a Wiccan package in there. I am not convinced that that is the correct way to build this deck, but I do think that it's more about pointing people in the general direction here. So if you're struggling with those Iron Man decks, I would point you very heavily in the direction of US Agent, Hazmat, Ajax, Luke Cage, Shadow King, all that kind of stuff is what I have found to be successful. Now, downside, the card Cosmo is quite effective against a lot of that stuff. Not all of it, but it's definitely like kind of the one way you lose. And it takes them from being like what I would describe as like a fairly unwinnable matchup if they didn't have the card Cosmo to a actually kind of not terrible matchup for them. But I do think there's still just so much to explore in terms of what we can do to beat that deck.
Yeah, I feel like I'm like that guy that's like totally opposite of you here, because like I'm the one that likes to do the broken things and really doesn't
Mm-hmm.
like the people trying to counter me doing the broken things. But like I guess the afflict strategies, but specifically US Agent makes a lot of sense right now, right? Because Iron Man turns from a powerhouse to an extremely useless card in the face
Yes.
of US Agent. So, and then firstly also US Agent is like ongoing, so the whole Cosmo thing is
Yep.
like a bit of a non-factor, right? So yeah, I guess affliction strategies make a bit of sense into this like so-called Bast Agent Venom like good stat deck. But I feel like you are right on one thing, which is that it's just like a theory right now. There's no like perfect 12 cards of affliction strategy that like kind of like just works in the meta right now, right? Like we know that US Agent is a good card into this. We
Yes.
know that like Hazmat is a good card into this, barring Cosmo. But like, is there a 12 card shell that like is perfect? I don't think so. At
I
least not
was
yet.
farming with a Quicksilver one, so there's probably got to be a better one. Like, there
Yeah, there's
kind of
bound to
just
be
has
way
to be,
better things
right?
to do than play Quicksilver, that's
Yeah.
for sure.
Like, there's probably got to be a better one. I went like 25-16 and gained like 41 cubes or something. It was like a straight up 1.0 cube rate with that deck. And that's Quicksilver. I'm playing Quicksilver. I tend to define metagames in my head based on the cards that are setting the parameters of what you are and are not allowed to do. And, to some degree, that's not the most, reliable way of doing it. But like, we've been in Alioth metagames before, we've been in Hella metagames before, and like, we're still sort of in a Hella metagame. But to me, the cards that really stand out as being played more than usual right now are Cosmo and Shadow King. And there's a direct relationship there, right? Like one of the
Yep.
reasons people are playing Cosmo is to protect their stuff from Shadow King because so much of the metagame is green power oriented. Every Agent Venom deck cares about getting Shadow King because of the green power. As they've become less bounce style Agent Venom because of all the things people are doing to try to beat it, including Cosmo, which is good into the bounce decks because there's so much Sage, Hitmonkey, etc. This normalish style of more face up Shadow Kingable Agent Venom has arrived on the scene, which means that deck needs Cosmo. There are multiple versions and variations of this, but the Woody deck is the most obvious of them as a face up Agent Venom deck that wants to have priority so as to prevent you from interacting with it. And I think that that is a unique and powerful and I think worth considering situation when you try to deck build to beat this metagame because it almost puts you in an impossible spot where you have to be able to go big enough to beat these decks while not being able to reliably use your on reveals. It's very difficult, and it's how I ended up at Affliction. But even Affliction is like, okay, they Cosmo my Hazmat, I might be screwed.
Yeah, so I actually kind of like what you are saying here regarding like you define metas based on like the tech cards that are relevant in the game, right? Like for example, there was a period it was a because I look at it this way as well, right? Like there was the Shang-Chi meta. There's actually been
Yes,
a lot of Shang-Chi
there
metas,
have.
right? There's also been quite a bit of Mobius metas.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, that's Loki's fault, by the way. That's 100% Loki's fault. But like, okay, but like I just want to say like I agree that like we can define metas based on the most popular tech cards because like at the end of the day, like these are popular tech cards because they win you the game versus the popular decks, you know. So like
Mm-hmm.
I feel like metas can be defined by effectively what's the best tech card to be played right now. And yes, Cosmo and SK they do have a direct relation with each other, right? Because as you say, like the reason why Cosmo is good is because it blocks SK as well, you know. So I feel like this is like I don't really have much to add. I just really feel that like defining metas based on the tech cards that can be played for the current like decks is something that's like I think it's correct. Like it's that's the right way of thinking.
I called an audible and changed the last topic here because I realized I wasn't going to be able to talk about this, and Lambie hadn't actually heard about it yet, which gives me
Yep.
the opportunity to get his take right immediately on it.
Let's
So,
go.
what we're going to talk about is the change to split rates and the history of it, because I have actually been intimately involved in the research of this in a way that I think many people will be surprised to learn about. So, for those who are unaware, recently Lauren over at Marvel Snap Zone, someone who I generally have a lot of respect for, a data
Same.
oriented person who's done a lot of good work in the community, did a Twitter thread pointing out that based on their research at Marvel Snap Zone, I'm not exactly sure who did the research. I think she collected the data, but I don't know exactly. Like it's from players. I'm not exactly sure the specifics of it. And based on that, there was a demonstrable decrease in the rate of gold and inked splits since the patch on August 20th. Now, there's some backstory here that I really want to impart because what I know is that there was a bug making gold and ink splits higher than intended. And my Discord
Okay.
found this bug about 6 months before Lauren and her team did. And what we decided to do with this bug was not tell anybody about it. Because as far as I was concerned, it was like bank error in your favor. Basically, we were getting free value. Once we had a data miner take a look at the files and see that in the actual part of the game, they were referenced as intended to be 10% for inked, 10% for gold. But in
Mhm.
reality, based on all of our data, it was actually much higher, closer to 25%. Once we realized what was going on, we were like, okay, we can't tell anybody about this. We banned all discussion of it. Every time someone brought it up, I would delete the message in my Discord, right? Lauren found this same info and tweeted it about 6 months after we found it. You can actually find me on that tweet saying, "Oh God, please don't tell them about this. Like you can't tell them that they don't. I don't think they know." And Lauren was basically like, "Sure, they have to know, right?" Here's the extra special sequel to this, right? Because you think this is going in the direction of, "Oh, I was right. They didn't know," and then like Lauren saying that actually tipped them off to the fact that this was like bugged high and then they secretly fixed it behind the scenes. No, I think the actual answer is even weirder, okay? On the 820 patch, according to the guy who runs SnapFan, they went in and they redid the infrastructure behind splits. And that change took out some of the things that referenced 10%, and like replaced the infrastructure behind them to allow for more split types, because that's when they changed foil, and that's when they said, okay, here's some other split types that we're bringing in. I'm not a programming guy, but my understanding is that as far as I'm aware, here's what happened. There was a bug that put the rates like from 10% to 25%, right? That's what we had before the patch. After the patch, for no actual reason other than they probably messed up a number somewhere, the rates are at, instead of at 10%, so they're still above what they should be, but it's 16%. So they went from 25 to 16, both of which are still over intended, and nobody is exactly sure why at this point. This is where I get into speculation, but I think that there actually just was a bug. They had no idea both before and after Lauren brought it public, and in their like rework of allowing more split types, they accidentally touched a number that changed that bug. So it is still more than intended, but it is less than what we're used to. And so the upshot of this is if you're chasing golden inks, it is worse now than it was. But I believe that this is literally just like there's a number somewhere that's the wrong number, and they accidentally touched that number. Like some guy has a button on his desk that's just covered in dust that they don't know what it does, and what it does is this bug. That is my understanding of it.
Okay, so after hearing that like long explanation and like learning things that I actually had no idea about, like okay, this even 6 months ago, like I had no idea that this thing was going on. I guess you guys really did a
we did
good,
a
like,
good
media
job. You
you guys did a really good media scrub. I had actually
Yes.
no idea. But so the funny thing, based on what you're saying, is that like the number was so high in terms of like chance of getting ink and gold.
Yes.
And then now after the number got tweaked, it is still high but lower than the previous high.
That is correct.
So like essentially what we are supposed to be experiencing is like nowhere near as often of getting ink and gold as what we are used to experiencing, right? So the funny thing is,
hold on, like just to clarify, their intended is, as I understand it, more than twice as rare as what we had before the patch.
Right. Yeah, so I don't wanna be that guy that's like, oh no one, this is why I feel like I keep getting so many ink and gold splits. But I look at my I look at like my 50 Thanoses in my collection, and I can see so many ink, so many gold, and I guess this makes sense of the whole situation, right?
Yeah. It was bugged high, and it's still bugged high, but like that is why. It is not actually
a lower high.
It has never actually been 10%. It has never been 10%. And I don't know. It's all public now, so I guess I might as well just like this is just like we might as well talk about it, right? But yeah, one of the specific things that we found was like there's an abnormally high chance of getting inked on your fourth split specifically for whatever reason. And that's one of the things that really twigged us as to being like, oh, they did not mean for this to happen. Like that was when we were like, okay, we have to not tell people about it because there's no way that would be intended. That's just like absolutely not a thing anyone would ever do on purpose. And so, yeah, I mean, just that's the story. For anyone who wasn't caught up, that's what's been happening with splits recently. There's a lot of drama. People are like, how dare they reduce the rates behind the scenes? My personal theory, I don't think they knew either time.
Yeah.
I just don't think they had even any idea.
I mean, it's quite clear they didn't know, right? Because even after the change, it's still higher than than what was supposed to be, you know. So I feel like it was an accidental, it was a bug, and then they accidentally touched it, and then it's still higher than what it's supposed to be. I mean, like this is very mind-blowing information to me, which makes sense, but it's still very mind-blowing information to me. And like, I just want to say that like Lauren is insane. Like I've always gone to her for like data-related stuff, even like when I was like super hardcore in Marvel Snap and all that. So like the fact that she actually like brought this to light was like super interesting, and the fact that you guys managed to keep it in the darkness for 6 months is also relatively interesting.
Did you? I mean, you were in. You don't check my Discord enough.
I don't check it. I'm like,
you don't check it at all.
Like
you're in the channels that we found this in.
Okay, so I'm kind of implicated
Yeah,
without knowing that I'm
like,
implicated
yes.
as well.
You are implicated by association here, yeah.
Oh
No,
dear,
like
oh dear.
I had I have a pretty strict no snitching policy. Like,
But
that's
yeah, I couldn't snitch. I didn't know I was involved.
all right, y'all. After that extended anecdote yap sesh, it's time to end. Thank you so much for
I'm
making
still
it through
mind
that
blown,
one.
guys.
I
I'm still
realized I
mind
wasn't gonna
blown,
ever
man.
get a chance to make a video about it, and I knew more about it than basically anyone except Lauren, I think. So I figured I might as well just get my thoughts out there. Yeah, that's my read on what happened. That's what I know. And
I just want to say, I just want to add one more thing that
sure,
this kind of work has so much Browday written on it. Like, I'm pretty sure
it wasn't
Browday
Browday.
also,
It wasn't
it
Browday. So
wasn't. I feel like Browday knows everything
I
behind
think
the
he
scenes.
knew about it and wouldn't talk about it, but he wasn't the person doing
Ah.
the research at the
Yeah,
time.
this feels so Browday. This feels so
It is
Snapdragon
very
kind of thing.
Browday coded, yeah.
Yeah. Alright, that was
I
fun,
don't want
guys. That
to
was actually
obviously,
fun to
I
talk
have a very
about.
strict no snitching policy. You'll never know if it was actually Browday or not. I will never say that on record,
That's
but
true.
it was not. So there you
Alright, alright,
go.
alright.
As always, I have been Cam Best. He's been Lambie Series. He's gonna take us out.
Thank you so much for being here. I enjoyed this one quite a bit. Hope you guys enjoyed it as well. We'll see you guys on the next one. Bye bye.